folks, welcome back to CFB Picks. This week we've got a great one in the preview. It's the Pac-12 championship between USC and Utah, a rematch of a very thrilling game earlier in the year, to say the least. Before we dive into this one, two things I need from you are to first put your picks for the score in the comments, and explain why you're picking, a blowout one way or the other, or a nail-biter like last time. And second, put in the comments which bowl games you want to see. I'll definitely be doing previews for the playoff semifinals and the national championship, but for some of those lower profile games that maybe the playoff steals a little bit of the shine from, throw those in there if you think there's a great matchup, and I'll be happy to do a couple additional previews there as well. So diving into this one, we'll start by breaking down USC. USC has been pretty interesting, especially the last couple of weeks. A lot of the Heisman hype is kind of surfacing for Caleb Williams, and they definitely have the stats to kind of back that up without even diving into their player-by-player stats. Right now, in terms of yards per game, they have the fourth best offense in the country. The yards against per game, though, I thought it was interesting that their pass defense is only 87th in the country. Actually, their total defense is only 87th in the country, rather. Their pass defense, meanwhile, is tied for 95th, and the rush is tied for 93rd. I found this interesting because all the focus seems to be on SC's offense, not their defense, and I think we can kind of see why now. And I think this kind of showed up the last time they played. 40-plus points against isn't great, even against really good competition. Their strength of schedule is pretty good. Average opponents around 59th in the country. And they're definitely scoring at a good clip. 42.5 points per game is pretty good. A lot of times these days, if you get 40-plus points a game, more often than not, you're going to win that game. Maybe not the case last time here, but I digress. So despite the hype on the offense, on both sides of the ball, they're really not too effective. And when we dive into Utah's stats, we're going to see that was a pretty big factor the last time these two teams played. Another thing to, I think, consider for this game is the play selection. To date, SC runs a very balanced offense in terms of run and pass. I think it's going to be interesting to see if that continues with the Travis Dye injury. I think it will. When you look at the yards per carry, so Dye was at 6.1 yards per carry, which is, really good numbers for a college back. I think I'm pretty high on Travis Dye. I think he could probably start or at least split reps at probably, every school with the exception of the top 10, maybe top 15. I think he's going to make a great back one day in the NFL. But even with his injury, they're not really out of it in terms of the rushing game. They have Austin Jones, who's the projected kind of back who's going to carry the load, and he's averaging 6.2 yards per carry. I'm not sure how much of that has been in garbage time, but that's still a great number. It sounds like they have a way to, not only involve him in the offense, but to really, have him be productive. 6.2 yards per carry is definitely one of the best numbers I've seen, at least for a back, breaking down several games this year. So I think play selection will be something to watch. As we dive into Utah here, the reason I mentioned play selection for SC is the yards against per rush is 55th in the country, and the yards against per pass is tied for 72nd in the country. So definitely a good clip better defensively on both sides of the ball for Utah. And I think it's going to be interesting, too, to see if we see maybe a bit more of a pass-heavy game from SC, maybe trying to attack that pass a little bit, the pass defense, rather, of Utah. In terms of Utah, I thought it was pretty interesting that their offense, while definitely not anywhere near as explosive as SC's, still 23rd in the country, and the yards against per game is 25th in the country, which I think is pretty notable for this game. And then we look at strength of schedule, they're just ahead of SC, averaging with their average opponent rank at 58.8. The yards per rush is actually 11th in the country, or tied for 11th rather, at 5.4 yards per carry. That's a really good number. Like I've said before in my videos, if you're averaging over 5 yards per rush, you're moving the ball at least you're averaging better than, not having to face first down just by keeping the ball on the ground, which I think is something that, can certainly be used as an indicator for success with keeping the chains moving. Looking closer at Utah, I think their offense really doesn't get enough credit. They're averaging just under 40 yards per game, which, more often than not is going to win you these games. And that's, why they're playing so well and they're at, 9-3 on the season. Going on from there, unlike SC, Utah is a much more run-heavy team, rushing the ball an average of 41 times a game, and passing only around 30 times a game. Just like SC, and I think what makes this game pretty interesting is, while their backs haven't been as productive as SC's, Tavion Thomas still is at, 4.8 yards per carry, which is a good number, and then Raleek Brown's at 4.6. So I expect them to, have a balanced attack like last time against SC headed into this one. So I think what makes this game preview very interesting is we already have some data from the last time these two teams played. And when you look at this matchup, it was, as the score shows, it was extremely close. SC actually had, 4 more yards, only 4 more that is, than Utah at 566 to 562. Rushing, SC was actually a bit better, 175 to 136. Then Utah had an awesome game throwing the ball at 424 yards for the whole day. That's just passing, which is pretty crazy. Though SC actually had the better yards per play, 8.1 to 7.3. And then what I think really kind of sealed this game was Utah's fourth down efficiency at 3 for 3, SC at 0 for 2 on the day. That's something that's really difficult to predict. I mean, that's probably not going to happen again in this game, but, it's a huge game for both teams. Utah trying to move up, to a New Year's Six bowl if they haven't already clinched one. And then SC, of course, trying to get into the playoff. At the bottom there, Dye had an exceptional game rushing the ball, as did Williams. I think it's going to be interesting to see if SC needs to run the ball with that efficiency again, can they get there? 7.1 from your quarterback and 6.9 from your top back who you now don't have are pretty great numbers. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, if there's maybe some way USC can kind of scheme a method to, get those rushing results again. Lincoln Riley gets a ton of credit for being a good offensive coach, and I'm sure, part of that was scheme last time that led them to be so effective on the ground. I think one thing to take away from this is, when you look at the stats in this game versus, each team's average performance, on the ground, SCO usually only allows 142, so they kept Utah actually below their season average. Utah, meanwhile, is actually a little bit better at 111 yards per game, and so they kind of had a bad day in terms of rush defense. But I think more importantly, when you look at the passing yards per game, I think that's where this game can maybe not be seen as an anomaly, but I think where it becomes harder to reproduce for Utah at least, despite playing a pretty poor SC pass defense as we previously saw in the season averages. Utah's only averaging about 248 yards per game through the air, and they had 424 in this game. SC, meanwhile, has an average of 322, and they threw it for 381. So, it's a good game for SC when you compare it to the stats, but it's a great game for Utah. So I think in this game, part of the question is, can Utah produce another, great offensive performance? With SC kind of peaking this year, I'm a little bit more confident that they can have a similar result with Utah. I think it's a bit more interesting, can they, get those passing yards again if they need it? So getting into the model, right now the model has this at 34.7 in favor of SC to Utah at 27.3. My pick for this game right now is actually 38-35 in favor of Utah. Right now in Vegas, this is a 2.5-point favorite for SC. During the week, it was a bit higher depending on your source. I saw a few numbers that were closer to 7 in terms of, or while favoring SC. and it's definitely swung back good 5 points in Utah's favor, and the OU's at 67. I think in this game, these teams have already played, and I think that's going to be good data for both defensive coordinators. That's why I'm expecting this one to be a little bit lower scoring. That's purely speculative. I think what is interesting is when you look at the projected yards per pass, as I said before, I think Utah's pass defense, or maybe we haven't talked about this yet, but Utah's pass defense, they're typically holding, teams to around 250 yards per game, a little bit under. I think they had maybe a bit of a bad day against SC, and that's why the model, and I think the model sees that as well. They're only projecting 5.6 yards per attempt for SC in this one. I think, Caleb Williams kind of peaking, playing his best ball this season, I think that number's a bit low. Meanwhile, for Utah, I think 8.48, at face value seems high, but when you look at where SC's pass defense has been and the fact that I don't think it's really improved a ton throughout the year, I think it's very realistic to say that, Utah is probably going to outpass SC in this game, and it's not going to be purely because of quarterback. I think it's more of a mismatch between, Utah, while they may not have the best receivers in the world, it seems like they always find a way to, find some weapons, particularly in their tight ends, and that, keeps them explosive. I think if Whittingham, has another great game of play calling, that's definitely going to favor Utah. And that's why I think, scheme in terms of, how these teams move the ball through the air, I think is also going to be really interesting. When you get into the rush yards projected, they're pretty even at 3.21 to 3.24. I really see the rushing in this game as a bit more of a way just to keep the ball moving when your offense or your passing game is sputtering. So I think right now, as I'm watching this game, the matchup I'm really most concerned about is, SC's pass defense, their defensive backs specifically against Utah's receivers and tight ends. Right now, most people are picking SC to win this game. I'm going with Utah just because I really think their defense is going to keep them in this one. I think they have a good enough offense to keep up with SC. Meanwhile, like I said before, I have major concerns with SC's defense. If I had to rate the confidence of this pick, I'd probably give it, like a 4 out of 10. I think in the playoff era, we've very commonly seen that, the better offense is what, not only gets a team into the playoffs, but many years, last year being definitely a bit of an exception, but a good one at that because Georgia had a pretty much historically good defense. But I think, having an explosive offense tends to carry more than having a good defense these days. So getting into this one, as I said before, the rush against, the pass against for USC is going to be tough. I also think, though, that there's a chance USC is the more explosive team, and that really puts Utah in a bind. I don't know if playing explosive football is necessarily suits them as well. If this one's a blowout, I actually would favor, or if I was being told that, this game is a blowout before it started, I'd probably say USC would be favoring that blowout. But what's leading me back to my pick for Utah is, this game's going to be played, on a neutral field. Last time Utah went into SC and won, granted by 1 point, but a lot of people will say that, especially in hostile environments, which I would very much consider USC to be, their fans always turn out. Home field advantage is usually worth around 3 points. So I don't think it's crazy to say that, Utah, at least against SC, when you boil it down to, not just skill, not just their stats, but, the matchups themselves, how each defense, plays against each offense, how their styles challenge each other. I think Utah, there's an argument that they're probably about 4 points better than SC, largely to the huge gap in defensive quality on their team. So that's what leads me to place my pick at 38 to 35 in favor of Utah. So with that being said, put your picks in the comments and be sure to explain why you're picking, blowouts, close games, etc. Let's get the conversation going for this exciting bowl weekend. And be sure to put in your bowl picks that you want to see models for moving forward. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching and have a great week.